I don't want to remember this incident, but I can't forget it. It happened 10 years ago, when I was 29. At the time, I was living alone in a small ground floor apartment that belonged to my aunt. I rented it cheaply while I was saving money, and because it was familiar to me, 1 bedroom, a small bathroom, a narrow kitchen, and a living room facing the parking lot. The building was old, thin walls, a shared hallway. One of those places where you hear other people's lives without ever seeing them. I worked during the day and came home around 6 in the evening. The same routine every day. I had dinner, watched television, and went to bed relatively early. I didn't go out much and rarely had people over. I lived quietly, maybe boring to some, but I felt comfortable that way. Despite my calm life, I didn't need everything to be perfectly under control. But when you live alone, every change stands out. I remember coming home from work one evening and noticing the smell of cologne. Definitely a man's scent. It was very strange, because almost none of my friends had been to my place. I was genuinely shaken. It felt like something out of a paranormal movie, when people sense smells left behind by someone who once lived there. The scent was faint, almost impossible to identify. I didn't give it much importance, since the hallway outside my front door often smelled like that, and I assumed it was just a lingering scent that had followed me in from outside. Everything seemed fine for the next few days, until one morning I couldn't find one of my hoodies. One I loved to wear. Nothing special, but it was comfortable and I liked it. I searched for it everywhere. I tried to remember where I'd last worn it, whether I might have left it somewhere, but I couldn't recall going outside with it at all. It had to be in the apartment. I thought it would turn up somewhere when I no longer needed it. Then I forgot about it. It was a Sunday, and I didn't think about the hoodie again. Over the next few days, everything was normal. My life went on as usual. I remember one evening, right as I came home from work, thinking, finally home. Cozy, comfortable, I'll rest. I went into the bathroom to wash up, and my heart jumped. Literally climbed into my throat. It started beating fast. I could barely breathe. My stomach tightened. There was a mark on the bathroom mirror. It wasn't a crack. It wasn't damage. It was just a long, faint smear, as if someone had wiped it with a sleeve. I stood there for a moment, staring at my own reflection, trying to remember whether I had done it myself. But there was no way I could have left the mirror like that. And what would I have even smeared there? Then I noticed the shower curtain. It was pulled all the way closed. I never left it like that. I always kept it half closed. I told myself I was imagining things. Most likely I just didn't remember. Maybe I was tired. But clearly I had some strange feeling, because I remember that night I locked the bedroom door. I never locked that door before, but that night I did. Honestly, that calmed me down. I must have fallen asleep quickly and deeply, because around 1 in the morning I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. You know that state when you wake up and don't know what time it is or what's happening around you. I was still half asleep, drifting between dreams, when I heard something from the kitchen. It wasn't a loud crash. It wasn't a bang. It was a quiet scraping sound, like a drawer being slowly opened. A wave of terror washed over me. I lay completely still, listening. For a moment, the sound stopped. Then, to my horror, I heard footsteps. They felt endless, or at least that's how it seemed. Slow, light, careful. As if someone already knew where the floor creaked and where it didn't. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it, grabbed it, and immediately, using the quietest movements possible, dialed 911. Honestly, during those seconds, or minutes, I'm not sure, I was in pure terror, fear, so many emotions all at once that I don't even know how to describe them. I only know I was extremely scared. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered as quietly as I could, "There's someone in my apartment." She asked where I was. I told her I was in my bedroom and that I hadn't moved. She said officers were on the way and asked me to stay on the line. She said she wouldn't speak and that I shouldn't speak either unless the intruder saw me. She wanted us both to stay silent. While we were silent, I heard something that made my chest tighten. Breathing. I could hear it so clearly. It was close enough for me to know someone was standing right outside my bedroom door. I pressed my hand over my mouth, terrified that even breathing too loudly would give me away. Then I heard a voice. It was a man's. I wasn't surprised, but that made it even more terrifying. "Are you awake?" To be honest, in that moment, I think I was in shock, because I don't remember whether he said anything else. My blood turned cold. Tears streamed from my eyes. I didn't answer him. I thought, this man is crazy. There's a crazy man in my apartment. Who talks like that while breaking into someone's home? I stayed silent. Then I heard him press the door handle. Luckily, the door was locked. I could hear him standing there, waiting to hear whether I was awake. I wondered if he would break the door down, but he didn't. He just waited. Maybe about 10 minutes after I called 911, I heard sirens. Then, fast footsteps in the hallway. They were his. He was running. I hoped they would catch him, but by the time the police came in, he was already gone. They searched every room, every closet. There was no one. They checked the windows. None were broken or open. They checked the door. There were no signs of forced entry. They asked if I might have left the door unlocked. Of course I said no. I lived alone, and no matter how calm I was, safety was always my top priority. They asked if I had a spare key. I hadn't. After they left, I checked all the windows and the front door again. I even placed a cabinet in front of the door so I would hear it if someone tried to open it. For a week after that, nothing happened. No smells, no sounds, no movement. I started convincing myself it had been a one-time incident, and I calmed down. I began to feel comfortable at home again. But I will never forget that morning. I woke up completely calm. It was my day off. Sunny day, so nice. I was thinking about drinking coffee and having a peaceful breakfast. When I got out of bed that morning, I turned to straighten the sheets. That's when I froze. It wasn't a person. It was my missing hoodie. Folded. Not tossed on the bed. Not dropped. Folded. That was when the fear really hit. Not panic. Not screaming. Someone had been in my apartment. I didn't know when. I didn't know whether he was still there. I didn't know what he had done during the night. The fear that he might still be inside froze me. I don't remember my thoughts. I don't remember my reactions. I was in shock. I didn't touch it. I called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. They asked about recent work being done. They asked which apartments had renovations, who had access to the back entrance. They checked the building's maintenance logs. 2 days later, they found him. He wasn't a resident. For weeks, he had been doing renovation work in a neighboring apartment. He had access to the hallway. He knew which tenants lived alone. He knew which locks were old. Until they caught him, I lived in constant fear. I changed the locks. I locked my bedroom door. I slept lightly. To my horror, when they arrested him, they found duct tape and gloves in his backpack. Whether they were for burglaries or for something more sinister, we never found out. Shortly after that, I moved out of the apartment. Even now, years later, what still haunts me is how this man was able to come and go, what his intention was, why he took my hoodie, and what would have happened if they hadn't caught him. This happened when I was 32 years old. At the time, it had been unusually cold for almost an entire week. Honestly, it was the kind of cold where the air feels sharp when you breathe it in. I was living alone then, in a small house just outside the city. 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room connected to the kitchen. Nothing luxurious. It was quiet and affordable. I liked that. I worked long hours. Most days I didn't get home until after dark. I will never forget that evening. It was one of those nights when you get home later than usual. I remember how cold it was and how I hurried inside, eager to get warm. I was genuinely happy, looking forward to a cozy evening at home. I was very hungry after work, like every night, and I went straight to the refrigerator to make something to eat. Honestly, I froze in place, though I pulled myself together fairly quickly. The container of leftovers I had planned to eat was gone. It hadn't been moved. It hadn't been pushed to the back. It was simply gone. I assumed I must have eaten it and forgotten. That's the most normal explanation. I work a lot, I get tired. It was completely possible. Nothing strange so far. I made myself dinner and forgot about the container. The evening was calm, nothing unusual. I relaxed after a long workday. I went to bed. I slept like a baby. The next morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary either. Maybe a few slices of bread were missing, but I don't count them and didn't think much of it. It's food after all, not jewelry or money that would make me think someone was stealing from me. Anyway, over the next few days, I noticed more things missing. Bread, a few protein bars, a bottle of water from a full pack. But I still didn't pay enough attention. I kept telling myself I must have forgotten. Nothing worried me. I lived calmly like always. I had a good sleep. But I remember exactly when I started to feel uneasy. It was a completely ordinary evening, very cold, but normal. After work, I hurried home, and when I walked inside, as usual, I felt relief. I was thirsty, so the first thing I did was go straight to the kitchen for water. That's when I saw it. One of the glasses in the cabinet was wet inside. Not damp, wet, as if it had just been rinsed and put back. I stood there holding it, staring at the water clinging to the sides, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. I thought hard. I wondered whether I could have left it like that, whether it was possible. That was the first moment I felt unsettled. Over the next week, I began noticing things I had previously ignored. One evening, I was suddenly washed over by waves of heat and cold. I went numb. As usual, I turned on the television, and my chest tightened. The TV volume was muted. I never mute it. Never. Usually, when I watch TV, I watch it with the sound on. When I turn the TV off and go to bed, I simply turn it off, but I never mute the sound. I stood up from the couch. I was scared. I admit it. Maybe someone would say there's nothing strange about that, but I know how I live. I don't mute the TV. It doesn't make any sense. I looked around. I listened. Nothing. I started noticing more and more things without explanation. The cabinet door slightly open. The bathroom fan still warm late at night. They were always small things. I started wondering if there was something sinister about that house. And then one night, when I came home from work, I smelled food. I'm a rational person, and I constantly make reasonable excuses. But that night, believe me, I truly thought there was something supernatural happening. I didn't want to stay there alone anymore. I was scared to go to bed. I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to leave and not come back. But it was cold outside, and I had nowhere to go. The house was empty when I checked. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. Everything was in place. I decided to go to bed earlier than usual. I thought that maybe if I had a better and longer sleep, everything would feel normal again. So I went to bed early, but I couldn't fall asleep. Normally I'm asleep by midnight, but that night I sat in bed and simply couldn't. I'm not ashamed to say it. I was scared. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I remember waking up. It was dark outside, and I had a very bad feeling. I assumed the adrenaline from the fear was still running through me. At first, I didn't know what was happening, and then I heard it. Oh, that sound, I will never forget it. The closet in the guest bedroom opened. I heard it clearly. Then I heard movement, not outside, inside the house. Quiet footsteps in the room next to mine. They weren't rushed. They sounded cautious. I lay completely still, staring at the door, afraid that even breathing too loudly would give me away. I remember thinking, this can't be happening to me. I'd heard many stories about ghosts, but I had never believed in the paranormal. I wondered if I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but I don't think I was. I was frozen with terror. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I just listened. A few seconds later, I heard the guest bedroom door open. It didn't creak. Whoever it was knew how to open it without making noise. That's when I thought, ghosts don't open doors. I listened, and to my surprise, the footsteps moved away from me, down the hallway toward the kitchen. That was the first moment I felt relief. I waited a little longer, listening to what was happening. And when I was sure the person or thing was downstairs, I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I called the police and whispered my address to the dispatcher, telling her someone was in my house. She said she was sending officers and told me to hide and not make any noise. Believe me, in that moment, instead of relief, terror flooded me again. I heard them. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they weren't calm and slow. They were fast, running up the stairs. Had he heard me? What should I do? I remember wondering whether I should attack him, but if he had a weapon, it was better to stay silent. Thousands of thoughts rushed through my mind. I don't even remember most of them. My blood ran cold. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I imagined him standing there, listening, waiting to hear if I was asleep, waiting to hear something. Seconds passed, then more. It felt like an eternity. Nothing happened. Finally, the footsteps moved away again, slowly, back toward the kitchen. While I waited for the police, I could hear him moving downstairs, opening the refrigerator, closing it, opening it again. He was eating. What was wrong with this man? Or this thing? He, or it, was eating. It was deeply unsettling. I wondered if I was going to die that night. But even more, I wondered what was actually happening. I heard the television turn on. Then the volume was lowered. That explained why the sound had been muted earlier when I turned it on. When the police finally arrived, I heard shouting and heavy footsteps. I heard someone running. I heard a door slam. They caught him in the backyard. Later, the officers told me he hadn't broken in to steal anything. He was homeless. As the temperatures dropped each night, he had been using my house to shelter from the cold. They believed he had been inside for almost a week. He had hidden while I was home, moved around when I wasn't there, or late at night when he thought I was asleep. He had eaten my food, sat on my couch, watched my television. Even now, years later, what still haunts me is that someone was hiding in my house. And now I realize how many times I must have walked past him without knowing. The worst part wasn't being alone. It was realizing how close someone can get without ever being seen. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me when I was a kid. It really stuck with me. And even now, I don't like being home alone. I was 8 years old. We weren't rich, but my parents had steady jobs, and we lived in a nice house in a good neighborhood. I remember I loved horror movies. I genuinely enjoyed them. I wasn't scared while I was watching, but I hated being alone. I'd get this paranoid feeling. Back then, I didn't even know the word for it. I just felt it. Sometimes I had to stay home alone for a little bit. 5 minutes, 10, sometimes 20. It didn't happen often, but it did happen. Most kids my age would have been excited. They'd feel free, like they could do whatever they wanted. I wasn't like that. I didn't like it. But eventually, I tried to ignore it, because it was usually only for a short time. Every time I was alone, my parents told me the same things. Like, if they repeated it enough, I'd feel safer. They'd tell me not to open the door, not to answer it, and to call them immediately if anything felt wrong. I always nodded and said I understood, even though my stomach would tighten every single time. And whenever I was alone, I did the same thing. I watched TV. It was the only way I could distract myself and not feel scared. Until that night. The night that stayed in my head. That evening, my dad's car broke down. My mom told me she had to run out quickly to pick him up. She said she wouldn't be long, told me to stay in the living room with the TV on, and then she left. The house went quiet in that specific way it always does when there are no adults around. I was sitting on the floor in front of the TV, close enough to feel the warmth from the screen. I kept the volume low, but loud enough to follow what was happening. I remember trying really hard to focus on the show, telling myself everything was normal, nothing was going to happen. And then I heard a knock on the front door. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It didn't sound rushed. It was slow, deliberate knocking, evenly spaced, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. At first, I didn't move. I panicked. I thought maybe it was my mom, like in the movies, and she'd forgotten her keys. But something in my head told me to stay quiet and not move. I just stared at the door, hoping it was my parents. Or if it wasn't, that whoever it was would just leave. And for the first time, I remember feeling my heart up in my throat. A few seconds later, the knocking came again. Same rhythm, same spacing. That's when I felt real terror, not just fear. I was terrified. I wanted to cry. I know some people would think an 8-year-old boy crying is silly, but I was genuinely scared. I wanted my parents. With them, I felt safe. If it was someone we knew, they would have called first. So it wasn't someone we knew. If it was a neighbor, they would have said something like, "Hey Laura, are you home? It's Dana." So it wasn't a neighbor either. Whoever was outside wasn't knocking randomly. I don't know what happened in that moment. Maybe the adrenaline kicked in. But I slowly stood up and took a few careful steps toward the door, and then I stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did the one thing I knew I wasn't supposed to do. I spoke. "Who is it?" There was a pause, long enough that I started wondering if I'd imagined the knocking. Then I heard a man's voice. "Hey, I'm here to drop something off for your parents." I didn't recognize his voice. It wasn't anyone from around us. And he didn't say his name. That was strange. His voice was calm, casual, like this was a normal conversation. I froze. Of course I didn't answer. I knew something wasn't right. Maybe he realized that because right away he added, "I've got pizza. Your mom ordered it." Pizza? What pizza? My parents hadn't ordered anything. Something in my chest went cold. I knew it wasn't true. I always knew when my parents ordered pizza. I'm not sure exactly what I felt in that moment. It was like a mix of emotions, but somehow I found the courage to answer, "I can't open the door. My mom told me not to." There was another pause. It felt endless. Then he said gently, "What am I supposed to do with the order? Your parents will be angry if you don't take it." It didn't feel right. If he was a real delivery guy, he'd be annoyed. But he was calm. That's when I stepped away from the door. I stood there for a second, listening. I heard footsteps, not coming closer, moving away. For a moment, I felt this short, almost stupid kind of relief, like maybe he'd finally decided to leave. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He was standing outside the living room window, close enough that I could see his face clearly. He looked like an adult, about my dad's age, and somehow that made it worse. He didn't look surprised to see me. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't trying to find me. He was already looking straight at me, and he was smiling. I will never forget that creepy smile. For a second, I couldn't move. I remember thinking if I stayed perfectly still, maybe he would go away. Then he raised his hand and knocked on the window. Not hard enough to break it, just hard enough to make sure I heard it. I don't remember everything after that because I was in shock. But I know I screamed. And I know I ran upstairs as fast as I could. I locked myself in my room and crawled under the bed, pressing my face into the carpet and trying not to make any sound. After what felt like a really long time, I heard the front door open. For a split second, I was sure it was him coming inside. But then I heard my parents' voices. I ran downstairs without even waiting and told them a man had been outside watching me through the window. My dad went outside immediately and checked the yard, the street, the side of the house. When he came back in, he said there was no one there. My mom hugged me and told me it was okay, that I'd just been scared. I don't think they believed me. Maybe they thought I watched too many horror movies. Eventually, they put me to bed. Honestly, I was already calm. My parents were home. I felt untouchable. And maybe that's why I fell asleep so easily. But later that night, I woke up because I heard something downstairs. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I lay there in the dark, listening, trying to figure out if I was still dreaming. Then I heard it again, the same soft knocking on the living room window. My stomach tightened. I didn't move. I didn't sit up. I just listened. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving around the house. They weren't rushed. They sounded like someone taking their time. Then I heard the back door handle move slightly, followed by a quiet rattle, like someone testing it to see if it was locked. I pushed myself deeper into the bed, barely breathing. A moment later, I heard footsteps again, this time across the porch. Then I heard the front door handle turn. Once, then again. Not hard enough to make noise. Someone was trying to get into the house. I stayed frozen, staring into the dark, listening to him move from door to door like he expected one of them to open. I don't know where I found the strength, but I couldn't stay in my bed anymore. I sat up. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my whole body was shaking, and I ran to my parents' room. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and started crying before I could even explain anything. They woke up instantly, confused, half asleep. I told them I heard someone outside walking around and trying to get into the house. But they didn't look scared. My dad said there was nobody outside and that I'd been dreaming. No, it wasn't a dream. It was real. But they didn't believe me. They even seemed a little irritated. Still, they let me stay in their bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wide awake, listening. I knew I hadn't dreamed it. The next day I went to school and tried to forget. And honestly, it wasn't hard being around friends all day. I didn't even think about the night before. But that evening, even with both of my parents home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like the house wasn't empty in the way it should be. The night was calm. We ate dinner, watched TV, and then I went to bed in my own room. That night, I woke up again with the same feeling, only this time, I realized something else. Right behind me, breathing. I felt like I was going to throw up. My body reacted instantly. Pure terror. I lay there with my eyes closed, not knowing what to do. Was it a person, or it was something else? I'd watched so many movies that I didn't even know what was real anymore. The only way to save myself was to wake my parents up, so I screamed. And at the same moment, I heard fast footsteps running down the hallway, followed by the sound of the front door opening downstairs. This time, my parents heard the footsteps and the door too. There was no doubt anymore. It was real. They called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, they searched the house and the yard, but there was no one there. Later, one of the officers sat with my parents in the kitchen while I listened from the hallway, pressed against the wall, trying not to make a sound. He told them they didn't think it was a burglary. Nothing in the house had been touched. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been taken. What worried them was where they found the footprints. They were near the living room window, near the spots where I usually sat, near the path between the front door and the window, like someone had been walking back and forth, checking angles. The officer said it didn't look like the man was watching the house. It looked like he was watching somebody inside the house. They believed he'd gotten in earlier that day through a small basement window that could be forced open from the outside, and then stayed inside until it got dark. Waiting, hiding, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the lights to go off, waiting for the house to go quiet. After that, I slept in my parents' room for almost 2 weeks, and they didn't leave me home alone again for a long time. I still don't understand what that man wanted. He just stood in my room. And even now, I think about how he waited, how patient he was, and how the second night felt different from the first, because the first night he left before my parents got home, and the second night he didn't. This happened when I was 24 years old, during a time when I was living with my brother in a small 2-story house. Nothing special at all, just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, a living room and kitchen downstairs. A place we rented because it was affordable and close to work, practical in every sense, and so ordinary that nothing about it ever felt unsafe. Normally, I wasn't alone there, but that night I was. My brother was working a late shift and wasn't supposed to be home until after midnight, which I remember clearly because I wouldn't have been stretched out on the couch watching a movie by myself otherwise. Even though I didn't love being alone in the house at night, it was familiar enough that I didn't think twice about it. It was a little after 10. The TV was on low volume. My phone was on the coffee table in front of me, and the house was quiet in that end-of-the-day way that usually feels comforting. The kind of quiet that makes you relax without noticing it. That's when I heard the first sound upstairs. At first, I didn't react at all because old houses make noise, floorboards shift, pipes click, and this one felt easy to dismiss. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it didn't sound random. It sounded like footsteps, slow and careful, measured in a way that immediately told me whoever it was wasn't rushing and wasn't lost. And that was the moment I muted the TV and sat there listening, waiting for the sound to explain itself. Nothing happened. I remember thinking that if someone had actually walked upstairs, I would have heard the front door first. So after a moment, I stood up and checked. The front door was locked. The deadbolt was locked. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it, waiting to feel reassured. I didn't. I went back to the couch and sat down, leaving the TV muted this time. And almost immediately, I heard a drawer open upstairs, quietly, like someone didn't want to be noticed. That was when my stomach dropped. I picked up my phone and called my brother, keeping my voice low and telling him I thought someone might be in the house. And before I could even explain further, he told me to get out immediately. I didn't argue. I stood up as quietly as I could, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away, and started backing toward the front door, every small sound in the house suddenly feeling too loud. That's when I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. I could hear the floor creak in the same spot every time, like whoever it was already knew exactly where to step. And then I heard breathing, not rushed or panicked, just steady, like someone standing still, listening to see if I'd move. I didn't look back. I unlocked the door, stepped outside, and closed it as gently as I could behind me. And the moment the cold air hit my face, my hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. That's when I looked up at the house. The lights were still on upstairs, and in one of the windows, I saw movement. A shape. A man standing completely still inside my bedroom, visible only as a dark silhouette against the light, close enough to the window that I could tell he was facing out, not moving, not rushing, just watching. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know if he could see me standing there in the dark, barefoot on the porch, staring back at my own house. And the thought that he might know exactly where I was made my stomach turn. That's when I called the police. I whispered into the phone, even though I was outside, telling the dispatcher that I had just left my house and could see someone still inside. And she told me officers were on the way and asked me to stay on the line. I stood there in the darkness, terrified that the silhouette would move, terrified that it would disappear, terrified that it might suddenly be standing behind the door instead. By the time the police arrived, the lights were still on, but the silhouette was gone, and the house was completely silent. They searched every room, every closet, the yard, and they found nothing. They said maybe it was my imagination feeding off being alone. And by the time they finished, my brother came home. After that, nothing happened. A week passed, no sounds, no footsteps, no drawers opening. The house felt normal again, and slowly, so did I. A few nights later, I came home from work tired and distracted, talking on the phone with my brother as I walked into the house. And as I went upstairs into my bedroom, I noticed that the closet door was slightly open. I stood there for a second, staring at the gap, feeling that heavy, crawling sensation in my chest, like I was being watched. But because I was still talking to my brother, hearing his voice in my ear, I told myself I was being paranoid. I just turned around and went back downstairs. While I was still on the phone, my brother told me he was going to have to work late again that night, later than usual, and I remember feeling that small wave of disappointment before saying goodbye. I sat down on the couch. The house was quiet. Then I heard it, the sound of a doors opening upstairs. My body reacted before my brain did. I jumped up from the couch, my heart pounding as I listened to footsteps moving across the floor above me. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, keeping my eyes fixed on the stairs as the footsteps moved closer. I knew whoever it was had reached the top of the stairs. I stayed completely still, whispering to the dispatcher, terrified that the next sound I heard would be footsteps starting down the stairs. The police arrived faster than before. I heard shouting, heavy footsteps running upstairs. They found him hiding in the closet of my bedroom. He was a co-worker of my brother. He knew his schedule, which nights he worked late, someone who had been inside the house before. They said he had broken in earlier that day, while no one was home, and stayed inside. Based on what they found, they believed he'd been planning something that wouldn't have ended with him leaving on his own. The man had told them he was in love with me, that we were meant to be together. I was shocked. I had barely spoken to him outside of polite conversation. Is he crazy? Unstable? And that's when I realized the scariest part wasn't that he broke into the house. It was that he waited quietly long enough for me to believe I was safe, and nobody knows what he was planning to do with me if the police hadn't arrived when they did.